Hi everyone, it's me, Sandy Cruz of Sandy K Nutrition, Health and Lifestyle Queen. For years now, I've been bringing to you conversations about wellness from incredible guests from all over the world. Discover a fresh take on healthy living for midlife and beyond, one that embraces balance and reason, without letting only science dictate every aspect of our wellness. Join me and my guests as we explore ways that we can age gracefully with in-depth conversations about the thyroid, about hormones, and other alternative wellness options for you and your family. True wellness nurtures a healthy body, mind, spirit, and soul. And we cover all of these essential aspects to help you live a balanced, joyful life. Be sure to follow my show, rate it, review it, and share it. Always remember, my friends, balanced living works. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sandy K Nutrition, Health and Lifestyle Queen. Today with me, I have a special guest. Her name is Dr. Sarah Berry, and she is an associate professor at King's College London, UK, and has run more than 30 human nutrition studies. Most notably, she's the lead nutritional scientist for Predict, the world's largest in-depth nutritional research at the science and nutrition company Zoe. I hope I pronounced it right. It is
You
Zoe,
did.
right? I
It
did.
is.
And today we're going to be breaking down the very complex connections between lifestyle, hormones, and health, and how diet can lessen the effects of menopause on women's bodies. And I think this is a very important conversation because myself, as a holistic nutritionist, I hear all the time about people who will do everything else in the world but change their diet when they have an issue. And I don't think there is a better person to have this discussion with than Dr. Sarah Berry. So with that, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. I'm excited to dive into it and also dive into why it's so difficult to change your diet.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a great topic because, the science says that diet matters and we can use food as medicine. And this is so important, especially for women who are just kind of entering into these stages and seeing these changes in their bodies, right around perimenopause. So I have to ask you if you could just let us know your background and why such an interest in this field.
Yeah, so I'm a nutritional scientist by training. I did my PhD many years ago at King's College London, a university here that has one of the world's leading nutrition departments. And I started off researching the impact that food structure has on our health, and particularly in relation to cardiovascular disease, and how the different fats that we eat and the structure of food, how it impacts what we call our postprandial responses. So our short-term responses to food. So the kind of metabolites that change 2 to 4 hours after eating food. And I started to notice that actually people's responses were so different. There was like a 20-fold difference between how one person would respond versus another person. And so I had the privilege to get involved with what was a startup 7 years ago, and now is a company called Zoe, Science and Nutrition Company, who have really been at the forefront of developments in personalized nutrition based on this idea that we all respond so differently to food. And through Zoe, we're running this huge program of research that you mentioned, the Predict program research, which is collecting data in hundreds of thousands of people and looking at how we differ between people, how we differ day to day, and how we metabolize food, and how we differ depending on multiple factors. And one of those factors we were starting to see a couple of years ago that was actually having quite an impact on how we metabolize food on our health factors as well, related to like blood pressure, lipids, inflammation, was the menopause. And so that's how I kind of dived the last few years into menopause research, and more recently also looking at menopause symptoms. So looking at the relationship between both diet and menopausal health. And by this I mean all the unfavorable health changes that happen peri and postmenopausally, but also diet and menopause symptoms, which is what many people talk about when we think about menopause. So that's how I've ended up where I have. So menopause for me is a relatively new area, but I have spent 25 years looking at the relationship between diet and all of the kind of factors that actually are relevant in menopause.
I'm going to say one thing that really stuck out that you just said is the bio-individuality aspect, and how certain foods will affect you differently than it will affect me. And I think that this is key here because, excuse me, I noticed in this area of health and wellness, we get a lot of advice, and it gets very complex, especially for women who are experiencing these changes in their bodies. And even though I'm a holistic nutritionist, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to have challenges.
Mm-hmm.
But when we hear advice that's pretty blatant advice, you must do this, you must do this, you must eat this, you must have this, you must take this, it gets very daunting for a lot of women, especially because we're already dealing with these changes. So I love that there's that whole bio-individual aspect to what you do, Sarah. It's amazing. So I guess we could start about, because you have such vast experience in this. What do we see around menopause that maybe makes this whole food aspect a little more complex?
So I think we need to step back and think, well, what is menopause? And I know many of your listeners might know this, but there might be many listeners that don't know this. There might be some men listening who have women in their lives that are going through this. So if we can just pause for a moment and think about what menopause is, then I think it puts into context why food might be relevant and why we have such wide-reaching health effects related to menopause. So menopause, very simply put, is the it's a point in time 1 year after your last menstrual cycle. So it's the point in time a year since you had your last period or last menstruation bleed. Now, you don't go to bed one night premenopausal and wake up, hey, presto, I'm postmenopausal. That's it. It's all over. No, it doesn't work like that. There's an entire menopause transition period. And this menopause transition period starts when your estrogen levels start to decline. And in the definition that we use as scientists, it ends 10 years after your last menstrual cycle. Now, the perimenopausal phase is the phase that your estrogen starts to decline up until when you have that last period, or the year after your last period. This can last anything from 2 years to 8 years, depending on individuals. Again, we're all so different. But what's really important to note is in this perimenopausal phase, what happens is not this beautiful slow decline in estrogen that your body adjusts to day by day. No, it's a roller coaster. It's this phase of hormonal chaos where you've got these peaks and troughs and moving around in estrogen. And that's why the perimenopausal phase is so challenging. Postmenopausally, it's more stable, but your body's still adjusting to this change in estrogen. And the reason that we know that perimenopausal and postmenopausal women have a multitude of issues is because estrogen receptors are all over our body. Estrogen receptors aren't just down there related to our reproduction or our ovaries. We have estrogen receptors in our brain, in our muscles, in our bones, in our heart, everywhere. And so as we lose estrogen, we aren't getting these estrogen receptors stimulated, and therefore they're not doing the job that they are there to do. And this is why we have such far-reaching issues or symptoms. We have health-related issues that we talk about a lot less, I think, or not as much as we should, related to menopause. So we know, for example, from our own research and other published research, that premenopausally, women are doing quite well in terms of health. So by this, I mean, at any given age compared to a similar age man, and I'm talking about the average here, women on average premenopausally have lower blood pressure, have better cholesterol, have better insulin sensitivity, have less visceral adiposity, so less fat around the belly, have lower cardiovascular disease risk. What happens is when they meet the perimenopausal transition phase, suddenly these start to go up, and suddenly their risk, these intermediary risk factors associated with cardiovascular disease, the blood pressure, the cholesterol, the insulin resistance, the inflammation, the visceral adiposity suddenly goes up to the level of men. And in some cases, in our own research, for example, with blood pressure, we see it even overtakes men. So firstly, you have these health effects related to menopause, which we know diet can have a really fundamental role in helping negate. And then you have the symptoms. This is what I think many people think about when they think of menopause. You have these really impactful symptoms. Again, they vary from one person to the other. And by symptoms, I mean everything from the neurological symptoms. So the memory loss, the brain fog, the anxiety, the mood swings, the depression, the low mood, to physical symptoms. So achy bones, achy shoulders, poor skin, poor hair, etc. To other other symptoms such as, the poor sleep, for example, and, sexual symptoms as well, loss of libido, vaginal dryness, etc. So we also have these far-reaching symptoms. And the reason is because we have estrogen receptors all over our body. We've not got estrogen binding to them. They're not doing what they should be doing. And so suddenly we're hit with these awful symptoms. And this is we've been looking at both of these in our Zoe Predict research. We've been looking at the health aspects. We've been looking at how they differ from people, how diet might help. And then we've also been looking at symptoms, how prevalent they are, how impactful they are on people's quality of life, and where diet might fit in with these, and also where other hormonal kind of therapies fit in as well.
Has the research that you guys have done at Zoe explained the whys? Like, I know you mentioned the estrogen receptors, but I do find it really, really fascinating that cholesterol, for example, goes up. And then I know we can't speak about prescriptions or anything, but you see a lot of women are, I guess it's suggested to them by their primary care physician to go on a statin because their cholesterol shoots up. So why does that happen is there another reason other than the fact that, we just don't have the estrogen anymore?
So that's a really interesting question, because what's very difficult with menopause research is to disentangle natural parts of aging versus what's due to estrogen specifically. Menopause is an age-related event. And so how do you disentangle? Well, this is just because you're getting older. So we know, for example, in men, as they get older, their cholesterol tends to go up. In women, your cholesterol tends to go up. What's due to the menopause versus what's due to age? Now, we do suddenly see like an inflection point, so to say, where cholesterol might steadily increase, and suddenly at the menopause phase, it suddenly goes up. We know that there are some underlying mechanisms for this. We also know that for the majority of people, if they then start taking hormone replacement therapy, and we see this in our research, for example, then your blood cholesterol levels go back down. So again, building that picture that it's not just age related, that there is a direct effect of estrogen. And this is for multiple reasons. So one of the reasons is that we know that your body composition changes during menopause. So estrogen changes where we deposit fat. So in a kind of very simple, using very simple terminology, we know that estrogen kind of directs fat to our hips and our bottom. So women have this pear shape. When you start to lose estrogen, you lose that kind of protective direction of fat to an area that we know is quite safe to have fat. And what happens is therefore you start to deposit fat around your abdomen, around your belly. So you increase what we call visceral adiposity, which is basically tummy fat. And we know this is really metabolically active. We know it's unhealthy fat. We know it's more linked with inflammation, with cardiovascular disease, with type 2 diabetes, with higher blood cholesterol, blood pressure, etc., because it's so metabolically active. Menopausal women have 5 times more likelihood of having visceral adiposity than if they're premenopausal. So firstly, you've got kind of indirect effects going on because of estrogen's impact on other areas. So for example, increasing adiposity. We also know that estrogen impacts many enzymes involved in how we metabolize fat, how we produce fat in the liver, how we remove fat from the circulation. We also know it's involved in processes related to how we process glucose as well in the blood. So from the carbohydrates in the meal, because it has an impact on insulin, for example, it has an impact on these enzymes, lipases involved in how we process fat. So we know that these, again, are all mechanisms that are important in also, some of the underlying pathways related to cholesterol metabolism, so that it's having that effect on cholesterol metabolism.
I always like to interject a little bit of personal to all of my recordings. I feel it really gives more of an authentic take on all of my recordings. And as a woman who's almost 55 and menopausal, exactly what you're talking about. And I know I'm an N of one, but I see exactly that when my estrogen is not optimized, I get that central belly fat. And this isn't to insult menopausal women at all. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that you can almost visually see that center of a woman get larger, and it's like their bum and their hips disappear, you know? And so a lot of women are like, oh my God, I don't know what's going on. I'm getting this belly fat. And for me personally, again, N of one, I know it's all about that optimization for estrogen. But I'm on bioidentical hormones, and that might not be the choice for every woman. So this is where we go, okay, well, how can I optimize my body composition using food and using lifestyle? Lifestyle matters too, and movement.
Yeah, and I think it's challenging, and I'm reluctantly saying this, that it's challenging, it's tough. But I think we have to be realistic in these conversations. I would love a belly like Jennifer Lopez. I would love, to look like Halle Berry. The reality is I don't. I'm 47. I'm starting to get a bit of a belly around my tummy. I've not put weight on, and I know it's because I'm in that perimenopausal transition. But we have to be realistic about what we can do about it. And I think that I'm not just saying we accept it, that this is just inevitable, but we have to accept it's going to be harder to maintain the body shape we had before if we're peri and postmenopausal. And this is because, as well as that direct effect that I talked about on estrogen and where it directs the fat, you've got so much else that's going on, which is where what you've said, lifestyle also comes into it, diet comes into it. So, for example, most peri and postmenopausal women, and we see that 85% in our cohort say that they're not sleeping well, that they have sleep disturbances. So 85% of perimenopausal women are having sleep disturbances. Now, sleep impacts so much. Sleep impacts our desire to do physical activity. Sleep impacts our mood. Sleep impacts our stress level. Sleep impacts the dietary choices that we make. If we've had a bad night's sleep, the reward centers in our brain are heightened, and they'll be saying, hey, Sandy, I know you were going to have this nice, healthy breakfast, but damn it, you've not slept very well. Go and have a quick fix. You're fighting against that. What we also know from our own research, from our Zoe Predict studies, is if you've had a poor night's sleep, you also have a difference in your metabolism immediately the next day. So we gave people identical meals across a number of different days to have for breakfast. These are high carb, high fat meals. And what we found is on the days that people had a poor night's sleep, when they had that high carbohydrate meal for breakfast, they had a higher postprandial glucose response. And by this I mean circulating levels of blood sugar after having that meal. They had a higher response compared to days when they had a good night's sleep. So you've got women who are having all of these things being thrown at them, the lack of estrogen directing fat to their belly, the poor night's sleep, the higher glycemic responses, the craving for different kinds of food, the low mood, the less desire to do physical activity, et cetera, et cetera. It's kind of creating this perfect storm. And yes, we can try and fight against the perfect storm, but I think we have to recognize that it's going to be harder. And do we want to fight against the perfect storm? Do we just accept, what, my body shape is changing, but what I will do is make sure that I'm eating as healthy as I can, but I will accept that my body shape is going to change. It's a personal choice.
Mm. And I love that you said that about the sleep, because I think this is key. If
Yep.
if women can really kind of have that as your foundation,
Yep.
and utilize the tools that are available to you, because I do feel that we need more tools in order to sleep well. I mean, if you're a mom, it kind of starts when you have babies. And then, and then you end up having teenagers, and then you end up having menopause. And it's like, it's tough. But I think if we put ourselves first and we do whatever it is, whether it is working with your physician, and, I know for me, I began using bioidentical progesterone, starting off with the cream. And this isn't what this discussion is about, but for me, it immediately helped me to optimize my sleep. That's where it kind of began in my 40s, because I recognized that it just, nothing else was working, and I needed to do what I could for my sleep. Now, the other thing I do find interesting is, I'm sure you've looked at this, and I wonder if Zoe has, and the Predict research has looked at this, just in terms of, our blue light, and how that might affect our circadian rhythm, which can in turn affect our hormones. I don't know if Zoe has done that, any research there.
No, we haven't done research specifically related to blue light. We have done lots of research looking at how time of day impacts our responses to food, how time of day impacts our postprandial responses, like our glycemic responses, how factors like meal ordering, time restricted eating. So we've done lots of work around that. And I think what this work shows to us is that there's lots of tools to our toolbox. So it goes back to something you were saying earlier, that again, I was saying earlier how tough it is. And I think that we can try to change our diet. It's hard, but we can also try and change other factors related to how we eat. And this is where I think the whole circadian biology is fascinating. So whilst I don't know how the blue light and the circadian biology fits in specifically with hormonal levels, what we do know is if you're eating late at night. So for example, in our cohort, we see that 30% of people are snacking after 9 at night. That's huge. We know that if you're eating after 8 or 9 at night, you're at higher risk of metabolic disease. You're at higher risk of higher inflammation, higher blood pressure, higher cardiovascular disease, etc. And again, because postmenopausally, you're already at higher risk of that. These are the kind of things that we could be quite mindful about, even if we're not totally changing our diet or making big changes to our diet. Why don't we change how we're eating the food? So why don't we stop eating late at night if we can, try and shift the last meal of our day a little bit earlier, and then change other factors related to how we eat. Try and give our body a kind of fast period. So try and make sure we're having 12 hours, ideally 14 hours, where we're not eating anything. And we ran this study called the Big If study, the Big Intermittent Fasting study, where we asked people at a population level, just try reducing the time window in which you eat your food. You don't need to go crazy. All the studies out there use these crazy eating windows of only eating 4 hours or 6 hours. That might work for some people. Certainly wouldn't work for me. So we just said, maybe have your last meal of the day at 7 o'clock. That means you can have your first meal of the day at 9 o'clock the next morning. So you're eating in a 10-hour window. This improved people's mood, it improved their energy levels, it improved their hunger levels, it improved their weight. And we saw this worked really well as well in peri and postmenopausal women. And we did this in 150,000 people and we told them, carry on the normal way you live your lives, carry on that noisy way you live your life. Don't change anything else. And we saw an improvement. And I think where we saw the biggest improvement was actually those that were doing what we call early time restricted eating. So those that were making sure they finished a bit earlier. So were, for example, having their last meal at least before 7 in the evening. And we saw a benefit across everyone, but the fact that we saw an even greater benefit in some of the peri and postmenopausal women, I think is really promising. And then another area that kind of fits into this, again, I have to caveat, it's not related to the blue screen, but it fits into this whole idea of the circadian biology that we're talking about, is that also we know that consistency in sleep is really important. Consistency in the time you go to bed. So we did some really interesting research that we published a couple of years ago on what we call social jet lag. I don't know, have you ever heard of social jet lag?
No.
So it's a relatively new term. And what it basically means is inconsistency in when you're going to bed in your sleep pattern. So, for example, people who are being sensible in the week, coming home, going to bed at 10 o'clock every night on a weekday because they're getting up for work. And then at the weekend, they're going out partying, going crazy, going to sleep until 2 in the morning. Or it might be the other way around. You might be like me, who works incredibly late every evening because I get so excited by all the science. Then at the weekend, it's like catch up time and I'm going to bed early. But it's that inconsistency. And we call this social jet lag, where you're changing your sleep pattern, not because you're on a plane, but because of how you might be living your life socially. And what we see is if you have social jet lag, we see that that impacts different areas related to health as well. We see it impacts some of the dietary choices you make, and we see that it also impacts your microbiome composition in a way that we know is unfavorable and may lead to other unfavorable health effects. And so I think this is fascinating. And the reason it's fascinating is because I think as nutritional scientists, we've always thought it's all about what you eat, change your diet, reduce this, reduce that, cut out this. Well, firstly, I think as nutritional scientists, we should say this is what you should add in to make it healthier. But secondly, we've got all of these other tools we can fiddle with. We can stop eating late at night. We can try and, eat in a more consistent way. We can do things like slow down the pace in which we eat our food. There's amazing research showing that if you can just reduce how fast you eat your food by as little as 20%, you can, without even thinking about it, reduce the amount of energy, so the amount of calories you're consuming, by 15%. So instead of having your breakfast in 10 minutes, have it in 12 minutes, because without realizing it, the evidence shows that on average, you'll actually eat 15% less calories. So there's all these different tools that menopausal women can bring in to help them on their journey.
That's one I've never heard, Sarah. I love that. So,
Oh, eating rate is fascinating. And I tell you why the eating rate's fascinating. Firstly, because there's RCT, randomized control trials, now showing if you just tell people to slow down their eating rate, you can see significant weight loss. So doing it in a controlled environment. So there's randomized control trials where they randomly allocate, overweight individuals to either eating at their normal rate or eating fast or eating slowly. Those that are told to eat slowly and eat slowly lose more weight than those who are told to eat at their normal rate. We also know it affects the rate at which we metabolize food. It affects our hunger feedback signals. And what's really interesting about this as well is that we know it's one of the mechanisms why these heavily processed or ultra processed foods, as we call them, are bad for us. We eat ultra processed foods on average 50% more quickly than unprocessed, nutritionally matched foods.
so I think that's very fascinating. Like I've always been taught to eat slowly because you will be, it's just like what you said about this hunger signals. You will feel satiated much sooner. But I find that really fascinating. And here's something, you're talking a lot about the eating window and the fasting. So I think you're going to find this interesting. Back in 2022, this was the year that I first experienced, I was 52. My cycle was really off. I think I had only 5 periods that year. Well, I was listening to, and I like to call it the Maniverse, the advice of all the giant, voices in the wellness space. And it was all about fasting. And so I'm like, they say to do this, so I'm going to do this. And I was doing intermittent fasting with only an 8-hour window where I could eat. And so I would stop eating whatever, 6:30 at night or so. And then I wouldn't eat until 11 o'clock or so, 11:30 the next morning. I had a very small window. So during that time that I was actually experiencing a lot of perimenopausal symptoms, my HbA1c went up to 6.1. So I was essentially insulin resistant at that
Yeah.
point. And so this speaks to exactly what you're saying about how everyone's different. And you have to be really cognizant of whatever advice you're taking in around menopause, that it's really applicable to you. So
Yes.
after that, I became a certified metabolic balance coach, and I actually did my own program. I changed the method in which I ate, changed how I ate. So I went back to 3 meals a day, but I still had a fast of, between 12 and 14 hours overnight. I started to eat with protein first. So the order, I don't know what you think about this, and I'd love to hear your opinion, or if there's research. I would start eating my meals with protein first, and at least a couple bites of protein before I ate anything else. I didn't go keto or low carb or anything like that, but I had really high value. I like to call it high value carbohydrates, much more on my plate. Not that I ate a ton of bread anyway. And I lost a ton of percentage. I'm going to say, I'm not going to give the exact percentage of body fat. And I lowered my visceral fat during that time to be within a healthy range. So, my question to you is, does the food order, because you hear a lot of different opinions on this, matter on how you're going to eat your meal? Like, if you start with protein, does that matter? Does that help with being almost like a buffer for whatever else is coming afterwards? Like, what are your thoughts on this? Because there are a lot of big names who talk about eating veggies first. And then, like, I would love to hear your take on this.
So I think there's two different aspects to this that we need to think about. There's what I call meal ordering. So the order in which you eat your meals over the day. And then there's food ordering, the meal in which you eat the order in which you eat your food within a meal. So we've done some research at Zoe looking at meal ordering, where we randomly allocated in a clinical trial people to different breakfasts. These were kind of high carbohydrate breakfasts. And it was in a crossover design. So over a period of a couple of weeks, every day they would have a different type of breakfast, but everyone had all of those breakfasts. But then at lunch, they were all given exactly the same meal. So they had different breakfasts over the 14 days, but they had exactly the same lunch on every single one of those 14 days. And what we saw was that what people were having for breakfast was partly shaping their postprandial glucose response, so this post-meal sugar response, to what they were having at lunch. So there were certain breakfasts that were causing people to have a higher blood glucose response to their lunch compared to other breakfast, even though the lunch was the same. Now, it was moderate. How that would impact over many, many years, probably it wouldn't impact things that much. And this is where I think we need to be very, very cautious. We need to be really cautious about how we're eating our food and the impact it has in terms of the size effect. So let's now while thinking about that, let's think about the food ordering, which is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So yes, meal ordering has an impact. There isn't loads of research around the order in which we eat different foods or different nutrients within the food and how it impacts our health, how it impacts our metabolic responses. There's lots of anecdotal evidence and from very well-known people saying, this is how I've done it and this is what's worked for me. That works for you, great. If that's how you want to eat your food, great. I think what the evidence does show is that, yes, if you have protein and particular types of protein as a preload, So particular types of protein that we know increase insulin, so whey protein, for example, that we know increases the secretion of insulin. And you have that as a preload. And there's quite a few studies that have done this where it's given like as a preload, maybe 30 minutes before a meal or 15 minutes before a meal. What that means is that you've got an insulin response so that when you're then eating the carbohydrates, the insulin's already circulating the blood. Hey presto, it can quickly then dispose of that glucose. So it's lowering your postprandial glucose response. What we also know is that adding fiber, any type of protein, and any type of fat to a meal, that delays your gastric emptying. So it delays the rate at which your stomach empties. So you will have glucose appearing in your blood at a slower rate and at a rate that then can be removed, so to say, more quickly by the insulin. So it's slowing down the rate. Now, whether therefore you should sit in a restaurant or sit at your dinner table and say, well, here's a lovely meal, there's some potatoes, there's some fish, there's some vegetables. I'm going to eat that fish. I'm going to wait 5 minutes because that's my protein bit. Then I'm going to eat the vegetables or potatoes. Or whether, according to other people, I'm going to eat the fiber-rich vegetables first, and then I'm going to eat the others. Yes, I believe, based on what evidence there is, it is going to reduce your postprandial glucose response. I believe, though, it only has a relatively small impact. And I think what we have to remember is what impact has eating that way had on you for your pleasure of food? Because what worries me so much in the wellness world and the diet world is that we are often recommending or making changes that actually have a really small size effect. Mm-hmm. Just because a scientific study has showed it's significant, does that really mean it's going to, over a long period of time, actually have that much of an impact? And also, the variability in how these different bits of advice impact someone is huge. So someone on social media who does the fiber first, for example, or the protein first, yeah, it might reduce their postprandial glycemic response by 50%. But actually, on average, it's probably not going to do that. And probably for many people, it will have almost minimal effect. So I'm a great believer in food being about joy, about being about pleasure, about being about our social connections, our culture. And so personally, I would never change the order in which I eat my food unless I liked eating a particular, bit of food first. My kids sit down, they eat their vegetables last, but that's because they don't like vegetables. And I tell them they have to eat that at the end. That's just the way that they naturally eat. When I eat my food, I just eat it in a random order. I don't even think about the order in which I eat it. But despite the evidence to show that, yes, it might impact it, I think it's going to have such a small impact compared to other things that I do, compared to the fact that I should have done that run that day, which I never do. The fact that I didn't go to bed at that time, the fact that I still had that glass of wine that I told myself I wouldn't have, they're going to have a huge impact. And I should focus my efforts on those. I don't think I should focus my efforts personally on some of these micro things. However, having said that, for many people, it's micro habits that are easy for them to do, sustainable for them to do, and therefore, in combination, if they do many of them, it might improve their health. Mm-hmm. So I'm very much sitting on the fence on that, but that's because of my own personal view of how I think we need to be careful in optimization, that we don't just have fun in life, have fun with food. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, you're talking to a girl who lost her thyroid at 41 and has done every single diet under the sun since then. So, I think there's a lot, and that's a totally different conversation. But in this world of food and wellness, there's a lot of what I call orthorexia. And I'm the first one to admit that I have had a lot of challenges around food because I kept trying, and you also mentioned that I kept trying to chase this pre-thyroidectomy body that I had before. It's kind of like these menopausal women chasing their premenopausal bodies. And it's like, that whole thing about food and pleasure. I come from a family where food is celebratory. But I also come from a family where you never leave anything on your plate. You see what I'm saying? So,
So do I.
like I come from parents who were farmers, old farmers in Croatia where food was scarce and there's scarcity in there. So there's a lot of topics surrounding that, but I do agree with you that food, it can be pleasurable. And I think a lot of women around menopause have this fear around food. And so, I know that you would know even about cortisol and how that can affect that weight gain. And if you're always stressed around
Yep.
what am I going to eat? What can I eat? And if it stresses you out to eat food in a specific order, well, then is it giving you that benefit anyway?
No, and I don't believe so. I often finish all my academic talks by saying, if a food or meal is too healthy to be enjoyed, it's just not healthy at all. And I think we really need to remember that when we're thinking about the choices that we make. But I think it's hard because I think we all want to eat the best to maintain how we might have been or what we might have been able to get away with 10, 20 years ago when we become pre and postmenopausal. It's tough.
It is. It is. It's just like back in the olden days where you would sit in front of the TV and get your popcorn and watch a movie and you never had to think about it. And every once in a blue moon, my husband and I will still have those nights because I'm really trying just to be more present. And, as you know, I was in Europe for 10 days. I didn't look at what order I was eating my food. I wasn't careful. I'm like, I am going to be so present in this experience, but it's not about gorging. That's not what this was about. It was about just being present and enjoying the food that I was trying from different cultures. So, um, I do have to ask you more about this insulin sensitivity. We kind of touched on cholesterol.
Yep.
So, is it because our estrogen lowers that we lose that sensitivity and we become more insulin resistant? Why does this happen? Is it specifically estrogen related?
So again, I think it's multifactorial. And I know as nutrition scientists, we say this about most things, but it is because that's the reality. So just like cholesterol, I think we've got the same thing going on. So for example, you've got that increased visceral adiposity. We know that that certainly impacts our insulin sensitivity. You've got the effect that estrogen has on insulin, for example, on insulin release as well. And then what we've seen in our research, and this was published about 2 years ago, it's very novel research, is we saw that people had, yes, very different insulin sensitivity, depending on whether they were peri or premenopausal. But what we saw was there was a difference in their postprandial glucose response. So we saw that postmenopausal women, and I think I mentioned this earlier, had a higher postprandial glucose response, so a higher blood sugar response after having carbohydrates in their food compared to if they were premenopausal. And what was interesting is that we were able to look, was this due to estrogen, do we think, or was it just naturally part of aging? So firstly, we looked at, do we still see this when we adjust for lots of other factors like BMI, like the background diet, like age, et cetera, et cetera. And we saw that it was still there, that even when we adjust for these other factors, you still saw this difference in this post-meal glucose response. But it's very difficult to ever fully adjust for age. And so what we did is, because we had such a big group of women that we had been studying, we actually took what we call an age match cohort. So we took a subgroup of individuals and we matched them for age so that we could remove this confounder of age, the confounder of the fact that menopause is an age-related event. And what we found is there was still a significant difference in postprandial glycemic responses. So these post-meal sugar responses, depending on whether you were pre, peri, or postmenopausal, with the peri and postmenopausal having higher responses, even in an age-matched cohort, which suggests that, yes, it is a direct effect of estrogen related to insulin, or related to the metabolism of glucose. And this is after we adjusted for factors like BMI as well. I don't know the exact mechanism. It's not something that we've looked into at the kind of molecular level, but I know that there's other people that have been looking into this.
Just curious, with that research that you did, was sleep in there? Like, because that's the other factor, right? Just like what you were saying, we all know that if we don't sleep well, we tend to eat poorly the next day. We tend to crave those carbohydrates that aren't really good for us. So was that accounted for other than just age?
That's a very good question, and I cannot remember.
I'm just curious because then it would be age, post-menopausal, sleep. Do you get what I mean? It would kind of have all those components, would be interesting to see.
Yes, I can't remember if we adjusted for sleep. We adjusted for lots of different variables, like how healthy the background diet was, like BMI. And we did see a difference, obviously, in sleep quality between the pre and post-menopausal.
Yeah.
So, yeah, would be interesting to see how our results play out if we adjust for sleep and then if we don't take the sleep into account.
Yeah. Yeah. It would be
We might
interesting.
have done that. I can't remember everything that
Yeah.
we published.
Okay. So let's move on to symptoms because symptoms are big.
Yeah.
And I know that there are plenty of herbals and things like that that women can take to help with symptoms.
Yep.
What about food?
So we've just recently completed a huge study. This is in 70,000 women where we asked them questions about their symptoms and we asked them what symptoms they had and we asked them to grade them on a scale of 0 to 5 into how much they impact their quality of life. From this, we generated a score using something that we call our menoscale calculator. And this is a calculator that's available for anyone. And what this calculator does, it generates a score out of 100. So you've got, and this is based on what we know from published research and our own research are the 20 most common symptoms. Now, I know that there's 50 or more known symptoms, but we have to stop somewhere in research. So we selected the 20 most prevalent symptoms, and then we asked people on a scale of 0 to 5, how much of an impact it's having on quality of life, and you return a score out of 100. This menoscale is available for anyone to complete. It uses modern language because lots of the other menopause symptom questionnaires use old-fashioned language like how excitable are you, which personally makes me want to throttle the person that did generated that. They're typically generated 50 years ago by men as well, who have no idea of what these women were going through. So we're using modern language, accessible language. It's free for anyone to go on. You can go to zoe.com/menoscale and anyone can fill it out. If you fill it out, then you get returned a score. You get told how you compared to someone your similar age on HRT or not on HRT, what your top symptoms are and how they compare. So we've got all of this data. We've got people's menoscale, so their average score related to the impact that the symptoms have on them. And then we've also got for these 20 different symptoms. And what we see first is that symptoms are really prevalent. We see that the kind of symptoms that we used to think were the main symptoms, like hot flushes, are actually the least prevalent. The most common symptoms are the things like the sleep disturbances, the brain fog, the anxiety, the low libido, the weight gain, the slowed metabolism, low mood, irritability, etc. What we see as well in this cohort of 70,000 people is that people have more symptoms as their BMI goes up. So people living with obesity have an increased risk or an increased chance of having symptoms and having them more severely as their body weight goes up. Now, this is a problem because if we go back to what we were talking about 15 minutes ago, it's really difficult to maintain your body weight when you're going through the menopause. So this becomes really problematic. What we also see on a more positive note is that people have a reduced likelihood of having symptoms if they have a healthy diet, if they have an overall healthier diet. And I don't mean by this, very specific foods, but I mean overall, if their dietary pattern is more healthy, they have a reduction in symptoms. Now, this data was collected at one point in time. It's what we call cross-sectional data. So what we did is we then looked at, does the symptoms that people are experiencing change if they go from an unhealthy diet to a healthy diet? And what we see is if we follow people up over a period of time, as people change from an unhealthy diet to a healthy diet, and these are people following our Zoe program, which is this personalized nutrition program, we see that they experience a reduction of around 35% in their menopause symptoms. Now, that's huge. Now, this isn't a randomized clinical trial. There isn't a control arm. So obviously, we have to be slightly cautious with how we interpret this in terms of the causality. But what we are seeing is in those who follow our Zoe program, who improve their diet, there's a 35% reduction in symptoms. We know from other published research, people following a Mediterranean diet also experience a reduction in symptoms. So it's not that we're just sticking out. What's interesting as well is we looked at these individuals according to whether they were on hormone therapy or not on hormone therapy. Those that were on hormone therapy obviously have a lower starting point in terms of their symptom burden. But what we see is they still benefit from improving their diet. They still get a 35% reduction in symptoms. And I think this is really, really important, that HRT alone is not the only answer. You can use diet with or without HRT to have a significant impact on your symptoms. Now, this is going to vary from person to person. And I know we talked about this earlier in our discussion. Some people will respond really well. Some people will respond less well. And it's about finding what works for you. And this is what I love about our menoscale that we've generated. People can use that to track how their symptoms change. So if they're starting on HRT, if that's their choice, they can see, well, let's track each week how my symptoms are changing. Is it working? If they're embarking on a diet or a lifestyle change, they can use the menoscale again to track to see, does this work for me? Does it improve my symptoms in a slightly more objective way than necessarily kind of trying to remember, oh, do I feel a bit better this week?
Oh, I love that. Now, people who are listening are probably going to say, well, what is a healthy diet? I know you mentioned Mediterranean.
Yep.
I typically follow a Mediterranean diet, I would say, for the most part. I am a big personally, this is me now. I believe in the 80-20 rule. I believe in, a balanced diet, but for the most part, whole real foods. So, what is classified as a healthy diet?
So a healthy diet means different things for different people. And I think a healthy diet also varies depending on where you are right now. So for the average American, average British person who consumes 50 to 60% of their energy from ultra processed food, a healthy diet might just be reducing that ultra processed food by 10%, just increasing an extra few vegetables, etc. So I do think we need to bear that in mind. But when I talk about a healthy diet, and when I talk about a healthy diet in relation to these results, it's a diet that is very high in fiber. It's a diet that's high in plant-based whole foods, like you mentioned. So these could be fruits, vegetables, pulses, for example, whole grain. It's a diet that is low in these heavily processed unhealthy foods. So low in refined carbohydrates, i.e. white bread, white rice, for example, low in ultra processed meats. So, your salamis, your hams, those sorts of things. It's a diet that's diverse. And this is really important because we know on average a food contains about 72,000 different chemicals. We want to get a diversity of chemicals. And so we often talk about having 30 different plants a week to get that diversity. It doesn't have to be 30, but making sure you're eating a diverse, array of different fruits, different vegetables, different plant-based foods, and trying to eat the rainbow. So plant-based foods often pigmented, like red peppers, beetroots, these sorts of things. The pigments come from polyphenols, come from these magical bioactives that we know improve health. So making sure you're also getting a diversity of colors in your diet. And then there's some evidence as well when it comes specifically to menopause that soy isoflavones might improve your health. Now, this isn't specific advice that we give in our Zoe program. What I've just mentioned before that is advice that we give that we see improves people's health. But I do think it's worth mentioning related to diet that I'm very, very skeptical about different supplements. There's a term we use in the UK called meno washing. Stick the word, the term meno in front of it and you can charge 10 times as much. There's so many supplements out there that are being sold to women at very expensive prices to say this will cure your menopause. This will solve your menopause symptoms. True. There's really, really inconsistent evidence. Now, what I would say is if it works for you, great. Because again, it's going back to that, we all respond differently. If you find a supplement that works for you, I think that's fantastic. But what we do know is that the only supplement that I believe there's sufficient evidence to show that it works is soy isoflavones. And these are a kind of phytoestrogen. And these are a chemical that mimic the estrogen molecular structure, and they bind to our estrogen receptors. So we know that countries where soy isoflavones are consumed regularly to a high amount, like China, Japan, they have lower menopause symptom burden. We know that if you supplement people at a certain level with soy isoflavones, then they will have, on average, an improvement in symptoms if it's a certain level. But we know that there's huge variability, and we know there's huge variability because what we also know is that your gut microbiome impacts how you metabolize soy isoflavones. So some people have a gut microbiome such that they get a huge benefit from soy isoflavones, and other people have a gut microbiome such that they might only get a small benefit. So it takes us back to that point earlier of, again, you might see a huge benefit from taking soy isoflavones. You might recommend that to your friend and they might say, oh, it's just not doing hardly anything. Mm-hmm. That's because we all respond so differently and for a whole array of different reasons.
Okay. I know that we're coming close to the end of the recording, but I can't not ask you about this topic, and maybe you'll maybe you'll answer this, maybe you won't, but what are the top 3 issues women need to consider at menopause, and how can we really we touched on so many different things. I just want something that someone can take away from this podcast and say, okay, I'm going to stop here. I want to address these top 3 issues, and we can eat the way that we've been talking about. Go check out Zoe, which I would like you to summarize what that's about as well. But what are top 3 issues? Like, is it heart health? Is it brain health? Like, what are the top 3 menopausal issues that women just need to think about?
Really difficult. I think we need to be mindful of our heart health because our cardiovascular disease risk goes up. I think we need to be mindful of our bone health because we know that estrogen impacts our bone health. And I think we need to be mindful of our brain health as well because of how it impacts our cognition, but also how our brain ages due to changes in estrogen. And I think what's common to all of those 3 issues are the 4 pillars of health. And I know that many know these are important, but I think it's really stepping back and thinking about these 4 pillars of health and can you change any of them? Physical activity, weight-bearing exercises in particular for bone health, physical activity for heart health, physical activity for brain health. Reducing stress, it's hard. Perimenopause and postmenopause is a time where women experience much stress. Often they've still got teenage kids, they're still working full time, they might be caring for elderly parents. It's hard to minimize stress, but being mindful of the stress, I think, is important. The 3rd pillar of health is sleep, which we've touched on. Anything that we can do for good sleep hygiene to help our sleep in any way that we can is going to help. And then the 4th one is diet that we've talked about. And those 4 pillars of health will impact all of those issues, our brain health, our heart health, and our bone health.
I love that. Now, tell us a little bit about Zoe.
So Zoe is a science and nutrition company, and Zoe is building on 7 years of amazing science that we've been doing, and the hundreds of years before that scientists all over the world have been doing in nutrition science to enable people to make the smartest food choices for them. So it started out on the basis of investigating how much variability there is between individuals in how they respond to food, and seeing that there's this huge difference in how one person responds compared to another person. And then we've been conducting lots and lots of trials looking at, well, what explains this variability? Why does someone respond like that versus someone respond a different way? And can we use vast amounts of data to predict how people respond to deliver the best advice? And so we deliver advice that's personalized to an individual's biology. So we look at people's biology. So we look at their microbiome. We look at their blood health. So we look at various chemicals circulating in their blood. We look at their glucose responses, etc. We ask people about their health history and so many other factors. We look at how people live their lives. So we look at how people make the dietary choices they make, why they make the dietary choices they make, what their preferences are. And people undergo a 2-week test period where we test lots of different things. So they're wearing different wearable devices, they're monitoring their glucose, their blood fats, their microbiome, and then using this years and years of science and these hundreds of thousands of data points that we've collected, we feed back to people after they've done this 2-week test phase how they should eat best for them that fits in with the way they live their lives. So it's an app-based product after they've done the test phase, and enables people to look for every food, whether that's the best food for them. It enables people to monitor the food they're having. It enables people to track their progress, to see whether they're having a healthy diet for them as an individual and overall. And people can sign up to do this for 12 weeks or 6 months or 12 months. And it's following this Zoe program that people have signed up for is where we see these big improvements in menopause symptoms. We've also published a randomized controlled trial in Nature Medicine a few months ago where we compared health outcomes, cardiovascular health outcomes, on those who were following the Zoe program versus those following standard US dietary recommendations. And we found that those following the Zoe program had significant improvements in cardiovascular related health outcomes as well as body composition, so weight and waist circumference.
Oh,
and it's
that's
available
amazing.
in the US.
It is.
Yes.
Okay. So what is the website? Just zoe.com?
Go to zoe.com and you can find out about the science we're doing. You can find out about the commercial product that we offer. Or you can find out also about our menoscale and all of our other research that we've got going on.
That's amazing. And I know that they're on Instagram, as are you as well, Dr. Sarah Berry. So I will have all this information in the show notes. And I just want to thank you so much for the wonderful conversation.
Oh, pleasure. It's been lovely chatting to you. It's just been like sitting, having a chat over a cup of coffee. Except I don't have my cup of coffee with me.
Not at this time, right? Not at this time.
Yes, not at this time. It's 5:30 here in the UK.
Yeah. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to share it with someone you know might benefit. And always remember, when you rate, review, subscribe, you help to support my content and help me to keep going and bringing these conversations to you each and every week. Join me next week for a new topic, new guest, new exciting conversations to help you live your best life.